It's 1936. Adolf Hitler is rearming Germany at a pace that British intelligence cannot fully explain, and British politicians refuse to fully acknowledge. But deep inside the Air Ministry in London, a small group of planners are staring at maps of English cities and doing mathematics that keeps them awake at night. The mathematics is simple, devastating, unavoidable. If war comes, and the honest ones know war is coming, German bombers will find Britain's aircraft factories within weeks, maybe days. One successful raid on a supermarine facility, one well-placed German bomb on the factory building the Spitfire, and Britain's most advanced fighter disappears from the production line at the exact moment Britain needs it most. A single point of failure in the middle of an existential conflict. The British government needed a solution that was audacious, unprecedented, and had to be invisible. What they built instead was one of the most extraordinary industrial deceptions in military history. And the unlikely heroes they recruited to pull it off weren't aeronautical engineers or military contractors. They were carmen. Your Jaguar mechanic's grandfather built Spitfires, and the factory where he built them is still building cars today. This is the story nobody puts on the brochure. The Shadow Factory Program. The plan that emerged from the Air Ministry in 1936 had a name that was almost deliberately understated: the Shadow Factory Program. The word shadow doing enormous work because these factories were designed to be exactly that: shadows, copies, dispersed, disguised, deliberately unremarkable facilities spread across the British Midlands, far enough apart that no single German bombing raid could destroy more than one of them simultaneously. The logic was coldly brilliant. Instead of concentrating aircraft production in dedicated aerospace facilities that enemy intelligence could identify and target, the British government would recruit the one industry that already had the workforce, the factory floor space, the precision manufacturing culture, and the management infrastructure to build complex mechanical objects at volume. The motor industry. Austin, Rover, Morris, Roots, Standard, Bristol, and yes, Jaguar. Companies that built carburettors were now being asked to build Merlin engines. Companies that built gearboxes were now being asked to build wing sections. Companies whose workers spent their days fitting dashboards and door panels were being retrained practically overnight to work to tolerances that aircraft engineering demanded and car manufacturing had never required. Some shadow factories were disguised as warehouses, unremarkable brick buildings in unremarkable Midlands towns with nothing on the exterior to suggest that Spitfire components were being manufactured inside. Some went further than disguise. The Drakelow Tunnels, an extraordinary facility carved directly into the sandstone hillside near Kidderminster, took the concept of hiding an aircraft factory to its literal conclusion. Underground, invisible from the air, bomb-proof by geography rather than construction. The Germans were looking for aircraft factories. They were looking for the long, distinctive roof profiles of aerospace manufacturing facilities, the specific thermal signatures of large-scale metal fabrication, the rail connections and material delivery patterns that industrial-scale production creates. They weren't looking for what appeared to be a mid-sized car plant in Coventry. When carmen met aircraft men. The Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory was where the Shadow Factory program produced its most dramatic collision, not between British and German forces, but between two fundamentally different philosophies of precision manufacturing that turned out to be almost violently incompatible. The factory at Castle Bromwich was initially placed under the management of Morris Motors. Lord Nuffield, William Morris, the man who had built Morris Motors into one of Britain's most successful car companies, was handed responsibility for turning Castle Bromwich into a Spitfire production facility. On paper, the logic was sound. Morris Motors understood mass production. Morris Motors understood how to organize a factory floor, manage a supply chain, and move large numbers of complex mechanical objects from raw material to finished product efficiently. The problem was that a Spitfire is not a car. Morris Motors approached the Spitfire the way Morris Motors approached everything, as an assembly line problem. Standardize the components, establish the stations, move the work down the line. Apply the same industrial logic that Henry Ford had pioneered and the British motor industry had enthusiastically adopted. Supermarine, the company that had actually designed and developed the Spitfire under R.J. Mitchell's genius, watched this approach with escalating horror, because Supermarine built Spitfires the way master craftsmen build anything extraordinary, by hand. Individual skilled workers, careful fitting, each aircraft assembled with the kind of patient, iterative attention to specific tolerances that assembly line logic fundamentally cannot accommodate. The Spitfire's elliptical wing, the design feature that gave the aircraft its extraordinary aerodynamic performance and its instantly recognizable silhouette, was a manufacturing nightmare. Each wing was essentially hand-fitted. The curves that made the Spitfire beautiful also made the Spitfire extraordinarily difficult to reproduce with the kind of interchangeable part consistency that assembly line production demands. Castle Bromwich's output under Morris management was catastrophic. By the summer of 1940, with the Battle of Britain approaching and Fighter Command desperately needing aircraft, Castle Bromwich had produced exactly 0 flying Spitfires. The factory existed, the workers existed, the tooling existed, and the production line logic that had built millions of Morris cars was producing nothing that could leave the ground. The government removed Morris Motors from Castle Bromwich management in June 1940 and handed control to Vickers, Supermarine's parent company. Aircraft men replacing carmen, and Castle Bromwich began producing Spitfires, eventually becoming the most productive Spitfire factory in Britain, building more than 11,000 aircraft before the war ended. The lesson that collision taught the British manufacturing industry about the difference between mass production and precision manufacturing echoed through every car that came afterward. The blueprint overlay. Place a Spitfire wing blueprint over a photograph of a car assembly line, and something remarkable happens. The elliptical curves of the Spitfire wing and the flowing body lines of a post-war British sports car begin to rhyme in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like inheritance. Because the workforce that learned to work aluminum to aircraft tolerances inside shadow factories didn't forget what they'd learned when the war ended. The men and women who had spent years fitting Spitfire wing sections and machining Merlin engine components carried that precision manufacturing culture back into the car factories, sometimes into the exact same buildings when peacetime production resumed. Jaguar's Browns Lane facility in Coventry, a shadow factory during the war, building aircraft components, then building Jaguars. The same factory floor, the same workforce culture, the same Midlands manufacturing tradition that runs from Spitfire wings to XK engines in a line of institutional knowledge that never actually broke. Land Rover's Solihull facility, shadow factory origins, the same story, the same inheritance. When Jaguar engineers in the late 1940s and 1950s were building the XK120, a sports car so aerodynamically advanced and so strikingly beautiful that it genuinely shocked the international automotive press when it debuted, they were drawing on a workforce that had spent the war years learning what aerodynamic precision actually required at the manufacturing level. Not theory, not drawing board ambition. Hands-on, tolerance-critical, failure-is-catastrophic aircraft manufacturing experience. The Jaguar's E-Type body, arguably the most beautiful production car ever built, the car that Enzo Ferrari called the most beautiful car in the world, was shaped by designers and built by workers whose understanding of flowing aluminum forms was forged in a Spitfire factory. That is not metaphor, that is manufacturing history. What the shadow factories actually built. The Shadow Factory program built more than aircraft. The Shadow Factory program built the British car industry's post-war identity. The precision, the craftsmanship, the specific culture of Midlands manufacturing that made British sports cars, Jaguar, Aston Martin, Rover, Triumph, genuinely world-class competitors in the decade immediately following the war. Germany had Mercedes-Benz and BMW rebuilt from their own wartime manufacturing infrastructure. Italy had Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, carrying their own racing and aviation heritage. Britain had something different, an entire regional manufacturing culture that had been comprehensively upgraded by 5 years of building the most aerodynamically sophisticated fighter aircraft in the world under conditions where failure meant death. The Shadow Factory program gave the British motor industry something that no peacetime industrial policy could have deliberately engineered. It gave the British motor industry a generation of workers who knew in their hands, in their instincts, in their understanding of what precision actually felt like, what it meant to build something that had to be perfect. Your Jaguar mechanic's grandfather built Spitfires, and when he came home and went back to work, he built Jaguars the same way. That's not a footnote, that's the whole story. Before you go, if the Shadow Factory program just reframed every British classic car you've ever admired, hit that like button right now. History this extraordinary deserves to reach people who care about it. Subscribe if you're not already here. This channel exists for exactly these stories, the ones that connect the machines we love to the history that actually shaped them. Drop a comment below. Did you know your favorite British classic was built in a Spitfire factory? Because now you'll never look at a Jaguar the same way again. The next story is already waiting, and it's just as extraordinary.